Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the session of Hudūr. And just a brief background about Sidi Yusuf. Dr. Yusuf Jah is a specialist in the religious sciences and a lecturer in Islamic psychology of Cambridge Muslim College. He is a certified holistic life coach, accredited counselor, and IOFI certified Sharia auditor, offering trauma informed Islamic spiritual guidance internationally. He holds a PhD in theology from the University of Nottingham, with research focusing on the spiritual path of Saluk, and is the author of Saluk and the Way of Return. Without further ado, Sidi Yusuf, if you will, please.
Hey, assalamu alaikum everyone. So inshallah, without further ado, I'm going to just go straight into my presentation. Just checking in, can you all see the slide? Yeah. Is it clear? Is it coming
Yes,
up on the screen?
alhamdulillah.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
I'm getting thumbs up here as well. Yeah.
Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. So inshallah, the format for today, it's basically to introduce this course that we're hoping to offer, and to frame that introduction in the context of what it is that we're trying to do and what the need for that course may be. So the course is Hudūr. Those of you who know Arabic will know that the word Hudūr means presence. And we've called it a heart-based stress reduction course. And those of you who are familiar with mindfulness will be aware that this acronym is similar to the MBSR, the mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And what that basically entails is that as we go through this presentation, it'll become clear, but essentially what we're hoping to do is to provide a Islamically grounded alternative to MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, for the reasons that we'll outline in the presentation. So just some brief etiquettes on the actual presentation today. We're just going to ask everyone to keep their cameras on if they can, if possible. We understand people may have reasons for not doing it, but where possible, it helps with the interaction. No recording, no screenshots. Please mute yourself. And if you do get a chance to ask questions, or if you even either in the chat or yourself, please just mention who you are briefly. And inshallah, feel free to utilize the chat option. If you, for whatever reason, you're conscious of coming on the mic, feel free to share your thoughts. And Tariq will be doing a lot of the chairing for the interactive part. So we'll start with our intentions, as we always do in our sessions, which is to intend true knowledge, and all true knowledge is a knowledge of disclosure that connects us to who Allah is and who we are. And we intend this in the spirit of aligning ourselves to what we've been created for, and where we're headed in this trajectory of life, in the spirit of benefiting others and benefiting ourselves, being in service of others and service of ourselves, holding firm to the guiding light of the Islamic tradition in the terms of the Qur'an and the embodied conduct of the Prophet ﷺ, but also in the continuity of that light through people who are given to the inheritance of that light. And we seek this ibtigha liwajhillah, as they say, purely not for the sake of Allah, for God, la li shay'in duna, for not anything else. And so that's the overriding intention. And as I said, this will be a brief presentation on what this HBSR course is, and then we'll open up the floor for question and answers. So, as I said at the outset, the HBSR, or Hudūr, is a course that is seeking to mirror and ground in more Islamic framing what is known as the MBSR. And the MBSR is an 8-week course, MBSR standing for Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. And this was developed in the late 1970s by someone called John Kabat-Zinn, who founded the Stress Reduction Clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. And what's happened is MBSR since then has been implemented in hospitals and medical schools across the USA. In fact, the last time I checked it, in over 30 countries of the world. And the last survey, at least the one that's on Wikipedia, says that by 2015, nearly 80% of all medical schools in the USA offered some element of mindfulness research. And MBSR is a big part of that. So one of the reasons why MBSR has this applicability and wide scale acceptance in the clinical space is because it's framed a lot of what it does in this kind of evidence-based framework of practical sessions. So there will be some theory, then there will be some element of practice in the class, then homework outside of the class, in a way that takes the students or the practitioners on a journey that finally culminates towards the end, either as part of the MBSR program or afterward as an all-day retreat or half-a-day retreat. And it has had a lot of success in helping trauma and reduction of stress, anxiety, depression, improving emotional regulation, better pain management, and things like interpersonal relationships, increased attention, compassion. So it's been used often as an integrative format that can be adapted to different programs. So it's been used alongside CBT and something called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. It's also used sometimes in combating programs for addiction. And it's become what many consider to be a standard, like the gold standard, in terms of an adaptation of something that comes out of a spiritual remit. And I'll mention where the word mindfulness comes from in the idea of MBSR, but in something that has found wide-scale adaptability in medicine, psychotherapy, education, and neuroscience. So what's notable about the MBSR is John Kabat-Zinn deliberately took a approach to remove the religious and spiritual system that grounds mindfulness in Buddhism. And I'm mentioning this in the context of the approach that we'll be taking to reground it in a way of making some of the elements of that could be counted as a success of MBSR more applicable to the Muslim community. But before we do that, we should actually focus on this word mindfulness, because it's a bit of a buzzword and not many of us have really looked into what it actually means. The word that's used, the original translation of the word that was understood to be mindfulness is a sati. Sati is an ancient language that is a language that is almost a sister language of Sanskrit, and it's used in a lot of Buddhist canonical texts. And Sati is considered in the Buddhist path, spiritual path, there's something known as the Magga, or the Noble Eightfold Path. These are 8 precepts that people are meant to practice in their seeking nirvana. And the word nirvana actually has a similar meaning to the word fana, annihilation. And so in seeking that path, sati is the 7th precept, called Samma Sati, which is the 7th precept just before samadhi, which is rightful meditation. So the word sati, translated by someone as mindfulness, actually means a whole host of things. And anyone who works in translation will be familiar with how whenever you're translating from another language to another language, then they say to some degree every translator is a traitor because it's only ever an approximation into the target language. And this is no exception. The word sati is a very rich term, and there has a whole host of alternative translations. And I was very much taken that amongst its translations that are probably more alternatively accepted by Buddhist scholars includes the word remembrance, retention, attention, recollection, self-recollection, reflective awareness. And I remember mentioning when we were doing a course on Cambridge Muslim College, and we explore alternative modes of spiritual engagement with psychology. And when we were looking at mindfulness and there was word sati, I remember saying, it has similar connotations to the word dhikr. Dhikr means remembrance. And it wasn't shortly afterwards, I think, that Sheikh Hamza Yusuf was actually doing a series of talks on mindfulness in Islam or the mindfulness of the Prophet. And he actually made the same point that, sati, the word that we know as mindfulness today, actually could be actually understood to be dhikr. So the use of the word mindfulness is a deliberate choice that was taken by a specific translator, and then it became popularized. And within Buddhism, there are critics of it. For example, the author of the book Beyond Mindfulness, Stephen Bodian, who's a former Zen monk and then popular meditation teacher, actually has a big issue with the word mind within mindfulness because he said it takes you away from the broader meaning and the spiritual worth of sati. Because sati is nothing about localizing the process in the head or the mind. It's actually to open you up to this mystery of awareness, of selfhood. Like, who am I really? And when you say mindfulness, you already reduced that mystery to something that is actually not the purpose of sati. So he said, and then of course, the whole point of sati is to transcend mental and emotional states in a sense of greater openness, spontaneity, and authenticity, which then allows, he said, for the heartfelt states of wisdom and compassion. So he says that's why sati is seen as a precursor to samadhi in the Buddhist path. Sati is that way of allowing for an open awareness that gets you somewhere. It's not a goal in itself. The goal isn't to be mindfulness, but the goal is to be in this state of open awareness so that you can enter into samadhi, the state of blissful presence with. And I say this because a lot of people confuse the non-theistic approach of Buddhism to atheism. That's not true. I advise everyone to read Houston Smith's book on, I think, the Way of Religions or something, where he speaks about Buddhism and he mentions what is a deliberate stance of who he says the founder of Buddhism would have been Gautam Buddha, which was to be non-theistic because of the nitpicking theistic debates that were happening at the time. And he wanted to align people to the experience, essentially, of God, as opposed to the theological nitpicking that alienates people from God. Um, that said, this secular form of mindfulness, and to go back to the fact that John Kabat-Zinn took a deliberate intent to do that, he took it out of the spiritual despite the fact that he himself had some training in meditative practice and was given to spiritual mentors, his approach to the MBSR was to take it out of that because of what he saw as greater applicability within the clinical space. And so you could argue that that has had a degree of success by what I was speaking about. What we're trying to do is to reframe it as the opposite, which is to bring it back into an Islamic grounding, and also to augment and provide an Islamic understanding of how we can tackle some of the very same issues that MBSR was intended to tackle. And so we're calling this program Hudūr, um, and we're going to be utilizing some Islamic tools such as, and we can discuss some of these, what they are, but there are Islamic tools of contemplation and meditative kind of practice, such as muraqabah, tafakkur, and these are some of the things we're hoping to do in this course. So, inshallah, just to break down the standard structure in a very broad way, so you understand how mindfulness-based stress reduction works as a program, that the first week is to introduce the concept of awareness, and it's typically done actually with an eating exercise. They call it eating a raisin, and how just through the sense of gradually focusing and being present with eating this raisin, this small, food item, that a whole sensorial world kind of opens up that previously, if a person is just automatically eating, they may not be aware of. And of course, then after that, there is a sense of just introducing this idea of awareness. Um, and they might introduce, there's usually within MBSR, there is an in-house exercise. So there will be an exercise introduced in the class. And in the early sense, there could be just an exercise that's just, like they call it the stop. It's an acronym for um, just bringing yourself aware of your thoughts in the beginning and then processing them gradually. Or they could have this 3 minute, they call it 3 minute breathing exercise. So something comes in and then you're literally allowing yourself some space to think before you respond. So they introduce these basic exercises as a kind of in class, and then there'll be some homework exercises outside of class. The second week becomes body awareness, and it's not a given that the standard MBCR structure becomes the MBCR structure all the time. There can be some alternations in this kind of order, but there's an idea of then bringing that awareness to the body. So there is something called the body scan, which typically they'll start from the left toe, and then it kind of goes up to the foot, and then up to the knee, and from the shin to the knee, all the way up. Then they'll start with the right toe, and then the idea is that when you bring your attention to your body, then there's also a kind of an awareness of the sensorial dimensions that's underpinning that body. So there might be a awareness of energy or some kind of vitality and maybe even some throbbing or pain. And all of a sudden that pain's come to the fore simply by directing your attention there, or a sense of expansion, a sense of contraction. And the idea is to do that across the entire body, which is why they call it the body scan. And that's typically done in a very gentle way. For some people, it can be quite an initial experience that can, even trigger something. So there's always stages in how these things are done. And then these things are introduced in once again, a homework format that people are meant to do for the course of the week. Then the third class is when they introduce the idea of thoughts and emotions. So there's this idea of looking at the mind, turning your attention back onto the mind. And there can be some meditative practices introduced. One of them is called RAIN, which is it's a guided meditation, and it's something that's been popularized by someone called Tara Brach. And it's another acronym. So RAIN stands for recognize, allow, investigate, or slash inquire with the I. And then N is nurture. So the recognize, which is the R, means when a thought comes, you first allow yourself to recognize what is this thought really saying, or some emotion is underpinned by a thought or some kind of feeling. Then you give it the space to be. And then you inquire into it, you investigate it, like what is it telling me about myself? And then the goal is to arrive at a sense of nourishing or nurturing that, some type of compassion. And there can be other ways that that's adapted, but then this idea of then becomes guided meditation. The person then goes into deeper forms of meditation about their own forms of presence, like who am I really? Then this is then taken more into like life situations, the distinction between stress and in terms of reactivity and response. Reactivity being something that we kind of do as an automated trigger. Response then becomes how we would um, otherwise be responding to a situation when we're not in that automated kind of state. In the fifth week, there'll be some introduction of mindful movement. This could be, sometimes it's hatha yoga, sometimes it could be qigong, sometimes it could be walking meditation. But the idea is to then bring this sense of presence into movement activity. Number six, the sixth week then becomes interpersonal. So how do we bring this in the sense of relationships? Typically, sometimes at this point, they introduce something called NVC, nonviolent communication, which is pioneered by someone called Marshall Rosenberg. And the idea is this, how do we bring awareness and compassion into how we communicate with other people, in the sense that almost everyone is communicating in a way to allow for needs to be met in the domain of relationships. So instead of when someone's communicating, if it seems aggressive, then rather than going into our reactive mode, we're meant to think about what's the unmet need here. and to hear that need, and then to do what Marshall Rosenberg calls empathetic correction before empathetic connection before correction. So you're empathizing, you're connecting with the person, and then rather than jumping into judgment. And then right towards the end, a lot of this meditative practice, as is very typical in Buddhist meditation, it goes into compassion, metta, self-compassion, compassion for ourselves, and compassion for as many people as we can to broaden that sense of mercy and compassion. And then the eighth one becomes integration, because the goal is that all of these supposedly discrete themes have been integrated into a practice. And the goal is that at that point, the people who are doing the program have acquired enough tools and enough awareness, because ultimately 8 weeks is intended as a kind of exposure therapy. It's not going to be an absolute, you've arrived at every single understanding of these things, but you've acquired enough understanding to design an ongoing practice for yourself whose integration is meant to be throughout your life, which is why the standard MBSR often ends round about the seventh or eighth week with a half a day retreat, or retreat in which MBSR practitioners are encouraged to devise a kind of practice for themselves, or there's a group retreat that happens whereby then they're kind of given this kind of exposure that enables them, empowers them to take this thing on for their own selves afterwards. So this is the standard MBSR structure. And I think you can see just within how rich that structure is. And this is a kind of a more expanded kind of, breakdown and how you can have in-core practices and home practice. So the idea is that there's this integrative exposure to the level of initially awareness itself, then at the level of the body, then at the level of the mind, then at the level of the heart, then to bring that back into movement, then to bring that into relationships, and then to end with this, what we'd call rahma, right? Compassion. And so if we see that as an arc, and just before I go, if you see that as an arc, the classical MBSR training is awareness, body, mind, stress regulation, movement, relationships, compassion, and then integration, right? So why are we actually doing this course? Is it because, MBSR is the best thing and here we go, we want to, Muslims to jump on the bandwagon as well? Well, part of the reason why we're doing the course is because of just the reality of, unfortunately, we as Muslims, despite having, in my mind, and I strongly believe, the most integrative, the most balanced, the most beautiful tradition to tackle a lot of the same issues that MBSR is doing, we have maybe not found the adequate language of articulation. And this is something that one of the great scholars, Imam Haddad, said, that what is the role of tajdeed? What is the role of renewal when it comes to Islam being presented? Because every era, as we know in our tradition, there are mujaddidun, there are people who are renewers. And the renewal is not so much bringing anything anew from Islam, because Islam is being perfected and uh, Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum. Allah says, on this day I've completed for you your religion, and I'm I've chosen for you Islam as your religion. Um, but the idea is to understand that every age has a language. And Imam Haddad said every age has a language. So we have to learn how to re-articulate this beautiful message in the language of the age. And I firmly believe psychology is a type of language. And if we want to popularize something in a way that is accessible, we have to utilize a medium of communication. So here's a bit of an anecdotal story that set me interested in this kind of path of looking for Islamic alternatives to MBSR. Is that in roughly 2015, 2016, I was resident in a particular Muslim country that was celebrating the Year of Happiness. And it devised a Ministry of State for Happiness. And it appointed 60 chief happiness officers. Now, as a fan of British comedy, I was quite familiar with Monty Python and the ministry of the Monty Python's. If those of you that don't not familiar with British humor, I wouldn't quite recommend you go down that road. But there's this famous skit called the Ministry of Silly Walks. So, and there's often this idea of the ministries, having these funny names. But what intrigued me about this particular ministry was it wasn't, to be fair to the Muslim country, they weren't the first people to come up with a Ministry of Happiness. The first country to propose a Ministry of Happiness was the Bhutan in 1970s, 1972. And they were doing it on the understanding of what mindfulness is as a practice. And when this particular Muslim country proposed this, what I found interesting was that these 60 individuals who were chosen to be quote unquote chief happiness and positivity officers were sent to the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, where I later on did my own mindfulness certificate training from, and the Oxford Center for Mindfulness. So what intrigued me was when Muslims are then trying to look for happiness, and the idea of happiness in our tradition, I mean, the word happiness has a kind of frivolous kind of dimension. People think of sometimes this song, I'm happy, and, somebody running around and being happy. And here there's a deeper pointer that, the happiness that's often being referenced in the spiritual text they talk about is sa'ada, is not this frivolous happiness, but is the blissful nature of a soul realizing what it's been created for. And that's why sa'ada is seen, probably better translated as felicity and not happiness, is seen as the goal of the spiritual path. And that sa'ada can only come when that felicity is aligned to God. And so what intrigued me was for a Muslim country to have to take on that path. That's an interesting thing. That's a good, see that in positive light. If the state itself is orientated towards spreading happiness. But why, we as Muslims, why have we become so bereft of our own tradition that we've had to send the individuals who are chosen to mindfulness centers? Have we not found the capacity to mine and articulate our own tradition in a way that can meet that need? So that was one thing that set me on that path to thinking about MBSR and, as a language, and how could Muslims potentially articulate that? And the second one was I was made aware of a prominent center established for convert care in California. Many of you will know the center I'm talking about. Because it's not as relevant, I'm not going to mention the center, but it's a very prominent center. It's one of the first centers that was trying to establish a third space, a safe space outside of the formal masajid framework, where people can literally come as they are, with all of their problems intact. And so the idea of that was that this would be a space that would support converts, and by extension, Muslims who are just beginning to practice their religion with all of the other previous issues. That would entail some kind of pastoral support, mental health issues that sometimes new converts face. As a convert to Islam myself, I can, connect with this. They can often be in the early stages of Islam. There can be emotional overwhelm, doubts and thoughts, social hardships, burnout, cultural dislocation, loneliness, rejection, grief over lost relationships, loss of identity anchors. So this center was set up for that. And then I was made aware, what was their primary methodology to provide support to these converts? And the people who were running these centers had studied traditional Islam for many years. One of them was a very well-renowned young student of knowledge, and they had access to some of the most prominent Western scholars of Islam who'd come back from Mauritania and Syria and so on. And somehow, what I was made aware from people within that institute, that when they went to these scholars, they were told, well, in terms of a program that is working now, what can meet the needs that we have now? Mindfulness and MBSR was the only thing available. And so they had Muslims who are obviously trained in their tradition, but they were formally using mindfulness and MBSR to meet the needs. And that was another wake-up call. And so in years since, I believe that program may have evolved and they've now got other kind of formats. Although at one point, I remember one of the criticisms of this convert care center was that, why are they using mindfulness? And then I remember discussing this with another colleague of mine who's in the field, and he said, look, we can't criticize them for initially using mindfulness, but what that should have been is should have been a doorway to create their own program afterwards. And so that kept coming back to the fundamental question that why haven't Muslims found a way to articulate a systematic program that can teach these essential life skills, emotional regulation, finding a kind of spaciousness to deal with anxiety, depression, loneliness, a way of regulating ourselves so that we can be more present and compassionate in relationships. Why haven't we found a direct way to transport our religious discourse into that? And not to say there isn't. Of course there is. We know that there are great scholars and there are spiritual paths who are doing that. But I mean in a systematic way that can be popularized and applicable at an institutional level. That's the question, right? That's the question. And so that's very much what this HBSR or Hudūr is an intention towards, to provide some type of answer to that and to be an attempt in that regards. And as someone who worked in Islamic finance and is keenly aware of the problems and shortcomings sometimes of the Islamicization process when it's done uh, erroneously, right? You can say, oh, Islamic banking. We take a bank and what does the bank do? Okay, that'll be big in Islamic bank. Oh, Islamic Big Mac. And what does a Big Mac do? Well, the end result becomes Islamic heart attack, Islamic diabetes. An oxymoron because we need to frame things within our tradition. Uh, as someone who worked in the Islamic finance industry, and also this is an academic interest of mine, what they call the Islamicization of knowledge. So the Islamicization process can be done in a right way and a wrong way. And the right way is, as articulated by one of the pioneers, Sayyidina Qib al-Attas, is to frame things first by the parameters of the Islamic worldview, which entails understanding these three key things: an idea of ontology, what is the nature of being with regards to Islam, teleology, where are we headed with this, and epistemology, how do we know what we know? And the wrong way of doing it is what we'd call the engineering approach, which is to take something pre-existing and to say, how can I slap an Islamic label on this? Right? How can I tweak a little bit there, tweak a little bit here? And here's the Islamic label. So we're not trying to do it the wrong way. We're trying to do it the right way. And that would bring us into these kind of discussions of what is the ontology of, or teleology or epistemology of MBSR. So as I said at the beginning, it was deliberately secularized. And so MBSR is fundamentally, the ontological basis is to build up a series of awareness. And it's a sense of deepening your awareness of the present moment experience. And this is how a lot of mindfulness teachers define mindfulness, to have a kind of building up this awareness of present moment experience as a way of building resilience and building a degree of emotional regulation and so on. For us within Islam, any type of existential basis is to realign ourselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Every single thing is a sign pointing to Allah. Allah says He'll show you His signs in the horizons and in yourselves until it becomes clear He is the truth. So our ontological basis for any Islamic MBSR would be to bring about a sense of presence ultimately with Allah, or the presence with the one who's ultimately present, right? Huwa ma'akum aynama kuntum, He's with you wheresoever you are, in a way that is not temporospatial. And then the next one, teleology, what is the purpose? MBSR is in the name, mindfulness-based stress reduction. So the purpose of MBSR is to reduce stress. Our purpose, inshallah, that can be a secondary intention, but the overarching goal has to be, once again, to draw nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? To purify the soul so that we can draw nearer to God. In a salvific framework as well, because we believe the human journeying in this world is ultimately a portent to fariqun fi jannati wa fariqun fi sa'ir, a group of people who are succeeding in the next world and a group of people who do not succeed. And so there's a salvific dimension to this also that we would bring in. Then the epistemology. In MBSR, because it's a secularized framework, the idea is that there is this psychological self who is probably not going to be defined, right? It's left in that psychological self. In Islam, and I did read Sister Tarana's kind of reference that maybe MBSR should have been called conscious-based stress reduction. And yes, that's how Islam would look at it as well, that as we go deeper and deeper into the question of who is the knowing subject, then that should open us up into the grades of consciousness that we have. Depending on how we articulate it, it could be nafs, qalb, ruh, sir, or it could be nafs al-ammara, nafs al-lawama, nafs al-mulhama, nafs al-mutma'inna, nafs al-radiya, nafs al-mardiya, nafs al-kamila. So these different degrees of consciousness that we have. And one of the most important things is we're framing all of this with the lived exemplar of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That we're not approaching this in the vacuum. We're approaching this from a position of we have a lived example of what it means to live all of this in motion. And I find interesting that Sheikh Hamza Yusuf would often, when he was doing his mindfulness series, he was all about the Prophet. He called him the mindful messenger, so that we could just understand what it means to reflect that. So when we have this, and if we have this in a framework of how we're going to ground MBSR into Hudūr, our Islamic version of an alternative, then we understand that why have we called it Hudūr? And why did I call it presence? Because Islamically, as we, the idea of this maratib of nufus, the grades of consciousness, is also deeply aligned with another Islamic wisdom concept, and specifically within Sufism, of what they call the layers of presence that we have. And many of the Sufis have spoken about Hadratul Khams, the five types of presences. And I don't want to go too much into that because that's come into different articulations in both metaphysics and spiritual philosophy and so on. But we're going to kind of build on that from a more kind of practical kind of dimension within the course that we're doing into five layers, just as a mechanism. And that's because if you look at MBSR, it has some of these layers too. So one of them is body presence, right? What is our hudur? What is our hadra? What is our presence with? Breath, sensations, posture. The other would be mind presence. What is our presence with thoughts, interpretation of thoughts, the thinking mind, the planning mind, right? Which often can go into either fear or hope. What is our presence at the level of soul? And by soul, we mean the patterns that are underpinning the thoughts often, the emotions, the desires. What is our presence at the level of the heart? These heart states of love, trust, humility, remembrance. And at the final level, it's this sense of, and we're deliberately saying that this isn't necessarily the goal of this course, but an idea to attain unto some of this proximity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that cannot be defined, right? And so what we're saying is this Hudūr course, the HBSR, is to gently allow for these layers of presence to be noticed and to recognize that many people, including Muslims, are actually cut off often from these layers of presence. And so the primary focus is layers of two to five. Layer one, although we can't say things cannot open up because the nature of the spiritual dynamic of human beings is that as you remove cobwebs from one layer, then another layer shines through. And so there may well be people who have spiritual experiences, but I want to make a very clear disclaimer that the goal of this course isn't to bring about this kind of divine presence or anything, because that is something we reserve for spiritual guides. I'm not a spiritual guide. My goal is very much in line of the broader goals within mindfulness, which is kind of MBSR, which is stress regulation, emotional regulation, awareness. Yes, to align it with the Islamic understanding of allowing for that to fit in our emulation of the Prophet and drawing nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's important to say that this is not a spiritual path. And we have these paths. We have contemplative, practices that are sometimes within spiritual paths. And, for example, the Naqshbandi path has something called muraqabat al-lata'if. the thinking of the subtle spiritual centers, or the observing of the subtle spiritual centers. But see, these parts are parts that have to be practiced within a lineage, and there is safety in that. And there has a specific mentorship of a spiritual guide. We're deliberately trying to create a course that is applicable and effective and can be popularized enough so that it doesn't require that. And that's why our framework is mostly 2 to 5. And I'll just mention just a brief outline here too, that how could that translate? This is just, like indicative. I mean, obviously, when you take the course, inshallah, we'll have in manner similar to the MBSR, we'll have a booklet that has each of the week's practices. There will be in-house practices, and then there'll be homework exercises. But in a way that is kind of a parallel to the MBSR, we'll be having in the first week an exploration of the idea of presence. The second week, we'll be exploring the body as an amana. In the third week, we'll be going through this idea of the nafs, thoughts and emotions, so dealing with the mind. Fourth week, rida, tawakkul. Fifth week, we may be dealing with adab and movement practices. I mean, we have the prayer to explore, and we could do mindful walking, we could do other things. Sixth week, reframing. We said this stress reframing. We're going to do things like shukr, sabr. How is that integrated into life? And then we will be dealing on the seventh week with compassion and relationships. And we may be specifically zoning in on marital relationships as well, because that's very important. And in the eighth week, just like mindfulness, the MBSR practice, we'll be integrating this all as an integrative kind of outlet. And then the goal is also there will be a retreat, which inshallah we'll be announcing as the program continues, as a way of kind of integrating it in a retreat format. And so the goal is that this can be a program that inshallah ta'ala can be, to whatever capacity, something that can be, our Islamic institutions, or, Muslim practitioners who are in the psychotherapeutic space. And they have people who are specifically coming from the Muslim worldview, who are not looking for a secularized kind of pattern, and they're looking for meaning, can be pointed to, and this can be inshallah more popularized. So with that, I'll end the presentation, and we'll open it up for questions, comments. So I'm just going to stop the sharing now. And inshallah, anyone who has any questions, comments on what we said, maybe Tariq. Oh, before we do that, um, the way I got to know Tariq, Sidi Muhammad Anis, who's hosting this session, is actually through one of these explorations. So I was a voluntary khatib. I was giving khutbas at a mosque here in the UAE, and a small group of us, of which the person who's hosting us in the house, she was actually a nurse, an auntie figure who's a nurse. Were literally looking for, okay, how do we? Because unfortunately, a lot of Muslims who struggle when they have difficulties, when they look for resources, they were not finding Muslim articulations of these. How do I deal with stress? How do I deal with anxiety? How do I deal with depression? And so we were deliberately trying to explore the MBSR course in this kind of safe space. I think there are about 8 to 10 of us, and we would gather weekly and we'd go through these weekly practices. And that's how I got to know Tariq, actually. That was the first time I met him. I didn't know him before, and I just, I don't know how that connection happened, how you ended up in the house. But feel free to share your thoughts, Tariq, on firstly how that went, and whether you think also, like me, there is a need for this.
Uh, well, there's, at least for me, it has been a definite need. I mean, if I can just, uh, I remember back in college, and in fact, throughout um, my younger years, for me, I was assimilating Islam in sort of a cold rationale, like most of the way that we were taught in school is, this is the ayat, this is the sunnah, this is how you pray, this is. But there was a missing taste, sort of speak. Like and so I was often quite jealous, as a matter of fact, of whenever I see these demonstrations of meditation and Buddhism. It's like, I just don't have this. Surely this exists in our framework, surely. And so I remember back in college, I would look this up on the internet. It was just a spur of the moment question that I had. Halas, I need to knock on this door. And YouTube was new back then, but there was this one video that I can't find anymore where essentially it just talked about the ego, and it talked about how Iblis was essentially the paradigm of what or the paragon of what a mu'min or a faithful worshiper could be. And then in a moment of arrogance, he essentially destroyed himself. And that sort of started a crack in the dam, so to speak. And then I learned about tadabbur and tawakkul, but I still didn't have a proper guidance. I didn't even know what mindfulness is. And subhanAllah, uh, I met the mentioned sister at an event, and I was told about the event that you and I. And then ever since then, there has been a space to appreciate things. There is a taste in our religion now. Um, just a very, I know this might come across as insignificant, but just yesterday we were having breakfast, my mother and I, and there was a bird that landed next to us, and it's right next to the sea. So if you had asked me before, if like prior to mindfulness, I would have been enthusiastically taking out my phone and taking pictures and social media stuff. And but now there's a sense of duty to sit there, look at it, and appreciate and say subhanallah and tasbih. So mindfulness has sort of given me this space to appreciate our religion more. Um, and God knows I need more of it. I still do. So,
I mean, I'll share just one more thing on this because we titled it. It was really crazy. I mean, I don't think it was that popularized, but I think we called it. I don't know, was it mindfulness for Muslims or Muslims for mindfulness? And years later, because it was just a pilot group, we were looking to explore the MBSR, course as a framework to how can we extract things and then build hopefully an Islamic alternative to it. But years later, somebody got the idea that, I'm kind of championing mindfulness in a way that I want to bring mindfulness into the Muslim community, and this is so dangerous, and be very careful, and and I just thought, subhanAllah, because that's actually one of the things that, my intention was to actually highlight a very real reality as someone was on the pulpit, that we have deeply, um, you know, uh, people who are looking and they can't find Islamic alternatives. And especially amongst our sisters, for some reason, it's a disproportionate thing with our sisters that they go exploring these alternative kind of modalities. And it was exploring that from the position of how can we find and mine our tradition, which is far more richer, which is far more deeper, which is far more integrated, to present things in a language that can become more adaptable. And sadly, I kind of got detoured, and we didn't continue that project. And we had a few pilot attempts, and we didn't continue it. And I'm still seeing the gap, right? The gap still exists. And
um,
those who are in the professional space, especially, and as I said, that when they want to, you know, point Muslims to just where do they go as a coherent program that allows them to learn some of these essential skills to deal with their anxiety, depression, and so on. There isn't much out there. So
yeah.
this is something that, inshallah, maybe this is the intention to be, maybe
Uh,
it's a drop in
I,
an ocean.
And I
Yeah.
think and I think I just want to add, City, that our tradition has all the necessary
Oh
building
yeah.
blocks.
No,
Like
no.
it has like I mean people quickly dismiss mindfulness as like, oh no, yeah, we have khushu'. Okay, great. How do you get to khushu'?
Right.
You know? And so yeah,
And I've heard the same. I mean, and as someone who actually believes that, like I've heard people say, well, okay, we've got muraqabah. And then it's
yeah.
saying, okay, and for whom? Like for whom? Because there are in a protective way, a lot of our deep contemplative practices, in a protective way, have within them layers of initiation that's not often accessible to the average person. The average person doesn't get the opportunity to sit with mashayikh from a trained lineage who then, and part of this in part of the goal is to be, and what this is what one of my teachers also said, that in this flood, in this global flood now of people being given stress and anxiety and depression, this is actually one of the means by which people come to Islam. Now, part of this then becomes that they're going to need people at intermediary levels to articulate some of the high, all these rarefied discourses that we have in our spiritual tradition in a way that becomes more accessible for these people. And then, inshallah, if Allah guides, people then, as part of that, they say when the person is ready, they get connected to those who they're meant to be connected to, right? But there needs to
Yeah.
be these intermediary spaces. And that's why I brought these two examples, one at a national level of 60 chief happiness officers going to the Oxford Center of Mindfulness in the Muslim world, and another at a very real local level in California, this Convert Care Center, which had connections with Mashayikh, having to use mindfulness, as its paradigm. So we want to open this up to more people, inshallah. Um,
Inshallah.
yeah.
Inshallah.
Sister Tarana,
Sister Omnia, oh, sorry. Okay, Sister Rana first. Okay. Sister Rana?
you have to unmute her. I think someone's,
Oh, okay. Hold on a second.
or Sister
Unmute.
Dania.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Um, just sorry, my cat, I can't take her away like your pet. And I have three of them, so it's a bit crowded over here. I find it a very interesting approach which you had, because I had my being from a psychosocial background, I have my fights with mindful approach, especially the word stress in it, because this Western psychology, it's just being an observer. And that's the end of the goal, actually. I observed, I am in a state of stress. And it's like tackling, like being the honor or being capable of avoiding stress. And this in itself is an illusion. To some extent, we can give certain people a relaxation. But this is an illusion that we have any capacity towards it. And I think that this whole mindfulness approach in itself is actually alluding that we have control over something. And this itself takes us again, as soon as the people leave the class, they will get into stress and trouble. And I think rather embracing the hal is the approach. And when you said HBSR, I would suggest make it heart-based state recognition. This is a step towards the Western psychology. Take the S for state. Otherwise, I would have said heart-based HAL recognition.
I actually like that. Yeah.
Because
I like that too. Yeah.
because the moment we accept, because in the trial, in the fitna, is healing. It's a code. It's and we in the lesson before I talked. We are like I see myself like a string of a violin, and I play on the bottom line. But my existence, my DNA, is far beyond what I see. It has a spiritual DNA, and if I play something up there, I am not able to get the same tone down here. And this whole symphony, this whole orchestra, and then comes the humanity and all how we work and everything together, our hal, our mistakes, our brokenness, our everything combined, we don't have the view on it. When the angel said, why do you create something which is going to make trouble? We in our existence are worship. Humanity in itself, in its brokenness, in its mistakes, in its everything, and then the longing again back to God is the worship which angels and Iblis couldn't recognize, and the angels are not able to do because they are binded to obey. So recognizing our heart. I like what you said, but the heart, in the moment we recognize, we be in that state. This is actually.
I take it. I'm actually going to change the title now. I
We
actually
should
agree with you, mashallah.
we should alert our team. Yeah.
Inshallah, don't worry. I mean, it's not gone to press now, so we can change titles. But
So,
just to catch on, and this is one of the reasons why Sister Tarana and anyone else listening, why I wanted to show that how even mindfulness, as it's been popularized, is actually outside of the Buddhist framework, because the Buddha, his whole premise was not stress reduction. His Four Noble Truths was, he said, the first thing is that existence itself has suffering by design. It's called tanha. And he says, but the real reason why suffering arises, or sorry, the dukkha, the sense of pain arises, is because of tanha, which means an insatiable desire for the world. So he said the only way you can get out of this, or this cycle of suffering, which is samsara, is, he said, nirvana. And nirvana means fana. And so people think, oh, what? So they like, oh, nirvana is this great experience, but it means fana, outside of this world. So it's almost like, and when you look into the text, this is why I referenced Houston Smith. He said it's actually saying the exact same thing the Sufis say. He's saying, because when he defines what nirvana means, it doesn't mean completely non-being. It means the non-being of that thing which is given to attach to suffering. And then you abide in the one who is present behind everything, who's bringing everything. So it's baqa, as in you align yourself to God. And then he gave the Eightfold Path, which is how do you live it? So it was almost like, and this is the nature of modern psychology, right? Is that they've premised themselves on the limited horizons of how can you be functional in this world of egos? Because they accept the ego as being just a reality. And in many ways, they've done that to other spiritual traditions, even the yogic tradition, although there may be issues with some aspects of yoga. Yoga was never seen as this kind of great, exercise kind of self-regulation thing. Yoga comes from the word yog, which means to align, to yoke every part of your being, to internalize it into one, so that you can arrive at what they call Raja Yoga, the highest form of yoga, which is realization of God. So part of our, understanding is we want to obviously reframe this in the deeper Islamic kind of understanding. And yeah, I agree with you. I think actually now I'll go back and inshallah, state recognition. Inshallah.
Just one small comment more. This whole the even this attempt to being fana or recognizing Allah or knowing this cycle of being and not being, being and not being, and the physics almost tells it we are at the same state and we are not. It's simultaneously. And I read a quote that the burning in the hell and the burning out of love, it's like almost the same. Or is the same, I cannot read. But the human being in itself, when you always said, Bala Shahidna, we took on us something which was so heavy in recognizing all these states, these hearts, and destroying ourselves. And even when you said the Hindus tended towards the sadhus to approaching actually a reduced life state because they feared this stress state. So they said, we will take the stress state. And the Buddhists said, no, it's going. So I'm just very happy that you take this really huge, huge approach, which is very difficult in itself. But I am looking forward and I hope that by recognizing one state, you, inshallah, will do a big step towards the way we think, because our way of thinking is too Western.
Yeah.
We have our traditions, and these traditions come out of experience. Our whole academia is not experience. This academia is worthless if we don't change. So I'm just praying that
Inshallah.
it gets on fertile ground.
Inshallah.
Yeah,
Inshallah.
inshallah,
And
inshallah.
any other comments, Tariq?
Actually, we do have. I want to read a question from the chat, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And this is more of on a practical level. So the person is asking, um, basically the hours are not great for her time zone. Sister Umniya, I believe, yes. And she was asking, by watching the recordings, could she still attain the certificate?
Yeah, and to go back to I think also what Sister Tarana said this, so the certificate will be accessible. I think the main thing is for people who've I think there'll be a way by which we can have some feedback based on people who've watched the recordings as well. And the main thing is the exposure to the content that we're saying. So there'll be different dimensions to this. There will be obviously the live in class exposure when we'll be doing exercises in the class. And I think for those of you who can, please do try and attend the live in class. And whatever teachings we have in that will be accessible outside of class as well, because every live class will be recorded. But then a key part of this course, which is actually the same as MBSR, and I think will probably be just as much, if not more important as part of the program, will be the homework exercises. Because in every week, we'll be leaving the class participants with something that they're meant to do as part of their ongoing experiential engagement with the course. And then we'll have a WhatsApp group where people can share their experiences. So there'll be, classroom discussions within WhatsApp, of which I'll be a part. And as that experience unfolds, I mean, just to go back to, I think if you remember, Derek, the way we were doing this mindfulness exploration, we'd have an exercise, and then we'd have a discussion amongst the participants, what happened,
Yes.
and those are actually often the most richest parts of the course. It wasn't,
Yes.
it wasn't the theoretical knowledge, it wasn't the frame, it was actually the participation of participants from the raw experience of what they're going through.
Yes.
And what was fascinating was even something like I remember we just did a connected breathing exercise, which was just regular,
Mm.
just watching your breath, which is one of the things that they do in mindfulness. And there was a sister in Charlotte. We don't know who, we're not naming her, so in Charlotte we can mention this anecdotally. Like the sister who had a divorce a few years ago, and all of a sudden, just this sense of just noting the breath created a sense of emotions and things that just came out. And she said,
Eh,
I thought I dealt with all of this. And then the whole
Ajib.
class sat as a group to contain that and to say, well, obviously, this is how things are processed often, that our sense of dealing is burying things. And look at
Yeah.
just this sense of just bringing awareness to your breath almost gives the permission for these things to come up because it's saying you have the resources now to meet it. Now,
Yeah.
part of that became now there needed to be some within the class we're discussing of how we do. And so it became a very, very, I mean, it was a journey. Like it wasn't, you think how normal classes are, you go and you study, and every single week became a journey of unfolding.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to alert those who sign up for, because that's actually how the MBSR course is. I mean, it becomes a interactive thing that your own engagement with the material, your going back and forth material, and obviously I'll be engaging with the WhatsApp group, so there'll be pertinent points where I might need to come in, and then I'm more than happy to. If there's something that's coming up, we can discuss it sometimes, within the group. But
Telegram, I believe you mean cities, right? Telegram, you mean?
oh yeah, well, so whether it's a WhatsApp or Telegram group, I haven't yet decided. So we haven't.
Uh,
This will be a group for the course. It won't be a public group. It will be specifically.
inshallah.
Yeah.
Inshallah.
So it'll be a
Inshallah.
restricted group for the course participants. So these will be so there will be in class, which then you can access through recordings. Then there will be homework exercises, and then there will be classroom discussions, which will probably take place in the WhatsApp/Telegram group. And then at the end, we'll have a retreat, which is open to the participants and others who want to attend, inshallah.
Inshallah. There was a brother, Bibi Jan. Am I pronouncing his name
Bibi
correctly?
Jan would be a woman, Sidi, most likely.
Sorry. I I share the sentiment of Dr. John Bronsis, and as I'm trained and a practitioner of the MBSR and MBCT in Singapore in the school setting, and I'm also into the Sufi program, I'm also afraid of being labeled as bid'ah when I'm trying to integrate. SubhanAllah. Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think we can, this is the nature of the field. You can't
mm,
get wrapped. There's always going to be someone labeling someone somewhere. So,
I,
so part of this is to, find your space and to be, as it bring a compassionate heart to everyone. And inshallah, we bring compassion to the labelers too. But I mean,
yeah.
much of what will be happening here, inshallah, and that this will be in the material. You'll find that when we have the formal material for the course, my intention, at least, because we want to popularize it, we don't want to make this too esoteric, right? So even terminology like fana and baqa, I'm sharing this because Sister Tarana raised this very high level of discourse, but we want to frame it within a way that's accessible to as many Muslims also as we can. So I'm going to primarily be, even in the guided meditation, I'm going to try and connect it as much as possible to Quran and Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
Yes.
and you'll see that when the material comes out.
Um, uh, um, I think this is a reiteration, Sidi, but Sister Zita, she's asking about how long are the sessions each week? Is there a certificate in the end? I'd like it to count towards my CPD hours
Yeah.
requiring my yeah. Is it
So
possible?
so this was something we discussed even with ISIP, and inshallah, future iterations will count. We hope that if Allah blesses us with future iterations and we attain the requisite, because for it to count for a continuous professional development, there needs to be requisite kind of clearances and authorizations. And because this is in many ways the first pilot course of this nature we're running, future iterations we're hoping would go down that road. There will be certification, but when at this stage the certification won't be used for CPD.
CPD.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. All right. I think I caught all the questions in the chat. Yeah. Um, I'm
Anyone
really
else want to come? Anyone else want to make any comments? Maybe live comments, or have we covered all the?
Just for me personally, Sidi, but like I'm just keen on the questions. But Jeff, I just wanted to make a comment, and is that um, subhanallah, whenever this is brought up, and the first thing is that I'm really glad that you called it Hudūr instead of mindfulness, even though that it is based on because there's a question that rattles the mind that I got out of Sidi Sheikh Hamza Yusuf was, what is your mind full of? So it feels like mindfulness in itself is a misnomer. Um, and I remember actually attending, even after our own session, I attended some of the non-Muslim frameworks that were being offered outside. And I remember seeing this one brother who participated who went into like an explosion of emotions. And sadly, the coach, I have no idea what his credentials were, but he could not contain the situation. It turned out really, really bad. And there are a lot of these people that are offering this without any of the proper foundations that we have here.
Well,
So
that's part of the. This is another thing I was discussing with another practitioner of this, and this is a dimension that's going to be a tough one for me because online is another challenge when you have a lot of people. But part of these courses, and that's why one of the goals that we're going to do with the Telegram group is also to create a kind of safe container. Because as I gave the example of that sister, as we explore Hudūr, as Sister Tarana also said, that presence has to be an allowance for expansiveness for the things that are going to come up, and they do come up, unfortunately,
yeah,
that are
yeah,
asking for, as part of the more blissful, states, they're asking to be seen in that, to allow for that. And that's part of how, that's part and parcel of MBSR training too. So it's not just, but part of that will be some dimension of inshallah ta'ala engagement, but I don't want to scare people too, because it's only 8 weeks of just
Yeah,
some.
yeah, yeah.
So it's not like you're going to, hopefully none of you are going to, have some big episodes. But the point is, this is actually how we regulate ourselves in many ways to build up resilience, to have this sense of allowance and the willingness to be present with this too. I mean, this is how the training is actually going to take place, that, you learn to be present with the difficulties just as you can be present with the beauties. I noticed there was a comment there about paying, and so the course is a paid course. So this is there's some fees from it. I think you'll see it on the flyer, but there are discounts available, and I'm sure. Please feel free to make any suggestions if you think that you can't afford it, or in installments, and also for those who really, really can't afford it. Inshallah ta'ala, there are scholarships available, so feel free to contact. I think ISIP are managing the financial process, and I think they're, at least on the course flyer and the course brochure, there is I think Sister Dania, if you can in the chat maybe write down the contact details of who they should reach out to for these questions, then that would be good, inshallah.
There's a brother, Matthew Bain, who says, "What are you mindful of? Is it also a big question in Buddhism?" As Sidi Yusuf says,
And,
MBCR. Yeah, go ahead.
and Matthew is a good friend and also someone, mashallah, who and I had the good fortune of getting to know at Cambridge Muslim College, and came from a background where he was, if you don't mind me declaring that, Sidi Matthew, but but he's come from a meditative background, Buddhism, and he became coming to Islam. So he's someone, mashallah, who definitely can, inshallah, would be great if we can have him part of the community, but someone who can
MashaAllah,
offer a lot of help and support, inshallah.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. Will this course be of benefit to beginners in need for support and stress reduction, or professionals, practitioners, counselors who are serving those people?
So the goal is actually both in some capacities. And even if like people have exposure as practitioners, if there's a sense of, if they feel the need to deepen that from a position of maybe an Islamic framing of it, that would be useful. But even just as the MBSR is often used for therapeutic purposes, right? So somebody who's typically undergoing counseling or is having specific life challenges, then psychotherapists would kind of point them to doing a mindfulness MBSR type course on the side, which would then help build up their own tools for resilience. So, people who are going through issues, that's also, although I have to say, obviously in my own capacity, like I can't become a direct therapist, a therapist in that capacity. This is a program whereby we're teaching material. So if someone is going through a lot of material, going through a lot of issues themselves, um, I mean, I could, if the thing's coming up, I can maybe point them to other people. My own just limited capacity in terms of time means I may not be able to be a direct therapist or counselor for them. No.
So with regards to any follow-up questions regarding the scholarship and stuff, I think what would be best, City, if we put ISIP's contact information in the YouTube description, and whoever has any questions with regard to this.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what.
yeah,
And the YouTube? Okay, put it in YouTube.
yeah, we'll put it in
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, any questions?
I'm seeing a question that says if somebody is already under the spiritual mentorship. Yeah. There's a
is
question that came up. If someone is already under the spiritual mentorship of a sheikh, will this course be helpful to them? So that's actually the point I was making. I'm not laying claim to be a spiritual mentor here, nor am I laying claim to be someone who's going to be a spiritual guide or a quasi-spiritual guide, or, what I'm trying to teach is some level, inshallah ta'ala, with encouragement of my own spiritual mentors and teachers, yani to some level of building of resilience, of kind of some skills on that are generic to some capacity along the path. Although, there's no harm, inshallah, if you have and I would advise this, if you already have a spiritual guide who you trust and who is someone, and like, mashallah, you have like accessibility to, then there's no harm if this is something you're considering to run by your understanding of what this course is and with them, and see if they think this is something suitable for you. Um, that's why when I mentioned those 5 levels, I was kind of trying to say that this isn't a goal where of the course to say, how do we bring you into the divine presence? That's not a goal of this course.
Inshallah.
Although, the nature of group meditation or meditation is that you can't control whatever happens to anyone. And
Subhanallah.
and one interesting experience I had was we were doing a group meditation and there was someone who fell into an incredible spiritual experience that they had. And they came back to me and they said, "Did you will that for me?" I said, I have no consciousness of what anyone's experiencing. All I'm doing.
Ajib.
Yeah. And what I felt, it wasn't a coincidence that that person who had that experience, because we both shared the same teacher,
Mm.
spiritual teacher. So it was almost as if the kind of, what I, in hindsight, think may have been happening was there was already a kind of spiritual affinity. And so the
Mm.
madad that comes from the broader connection to our teachers can sometimes flow through things. But I want to be open and say, this is not, lest anyone get very wary and so on. This is not a tariqah. This is not a spiritual, we're trying to bring people into some kind of movement or anything. If anything, it's to bring a kind of more commonplace, accessible spiritual discourse that is open to everyone, because that's what
Yeah.
we need, right? And
Yeah.
that's the challenge that I think we're missing.
I think we can conclude with Sister Tarana's last
She's
question.
got it. Okay. Yeah, she's got a
Yeah,
hand raised.
yeah. Let me.
Just before you do that, I think Sidi Matthews asked, can we go ahead and register the course now? Yeah. So there's actually it's open for registration. We've already had, last time I checked, 15 people have registered already. And so there is an early bird. I don't know how much it is, but it's an early bird registration discount available as well. It's probably $20 or something, I think, off the original price. But yeah.
Sister Dania just posted something important for. I think it'll answer a lot of questions. So, but
Okay.
yeah. So okay, well, I'll go ahead and unmute Tarana for your question, sister.
Yeah, two questions. One was, I don't know if you mentioned it, how long will be the session for each course? And secondly, the topics which you mentioned in the sessions are quite densely packed. First, cognitively understanding them, then going into practice.
Yeah.
Why did you choose 8 sessions and not made the course longer? Like, because I can hear out that it's a kind of experiencing. So I would have thought then maybe it would go like for half a year or something like that.
Well,
Because
we could.
No.
intellectually understanding it and then experiencing it's very heavy.
Well, the real reason why I did 8 sessions is because I'm mirroring it on MBSR, right? At least at that structural level. So they have 8 sessions and then they have a retreat at the end. And, also from a level of, the MBSR isn't to say like this is the end. So the MBSR, if you look at the official MBSR or Palaus mindfulness website, it opens you up into a practice where then you have many other resources and many things, and you build up communities and you can revisit things. So the goal isn't to say we're going to encompass these topics. I mean, these topics, as you said, even more than half a year would not be enough to encompass these topics, and probably they're lifetime topics, many of them, and it's a lifetime practice. But that's where I think the skill is going to come. And that's the challenge for me, is to have a right mix where you're giving just about enough, not at a very complicated level, but as kind of pointers, which is how the MBSR project course is designed. So I'm going to give some pointers. So the theory is given as direct pointers and just, things that people can grasp. And then there'll be some exercise level within the class. We'll be doing some guided meditation. Then there'll be some discussions on what we do within the class. So I'm seeing this whole thing, the in-class kind of explorations, as being about an hour, 30 minutes, right? Allowing for breaks in between, maybe one break in between. And then the homework would then follow from that. And then there'd be more interactions happening through the whatever social media channel we're using, Telegram, WhatsApp. So does anyone have any comments on that? They see that as a format. I mean, so the material isn't the theoretical material. I'm deliberately not going to make very dense, right? Yeah.
Concise. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
concise.
concise.
Yeah. One,
Okay.
see, that was You concisely wrapped my 3 words into 1 word.
Inshallah. Okay.
Inshallah. Okay. Any other further questions, comments? You had 2 questions, Sister Tarana, or was that just the one? Okay.
Just the one.
Just the one.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, inshallah, I think that's enough. And then we may have another follow-up from this, another course kind of clarifying in case other people have more questions on this. Typically with the MBSR, there usually is an orientation session before. So that I think we might have an orientation session which will be open access to people, again, similar to this, before we formally
Inshallah.
start the course. That will be after Ramadan, so we'll mention the dates for that later,
Inshallah.
inshallah. Okay.
Inshallah.
بهذا القدر كفاية لمن أدركته العناية. To this degree there is sufficiency to whomsoever avails the divine clemency. سبحانك وبحمدك سبحان العظيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you everyone for coming.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you.